Welcome everyone to Surviving the Anxiety of Back to School Planning for COVID-19. This webinar is brought to you by Brightspot Ed, and this will be available on the website and through links of our social media. We're super excited that you've tuned in today. We know that this is a stressful time for everyone, and the question continues to be, how can you plan when the situation changes every day and sometimes multiple times a day? And what we are really proposing is a mindset to planning. And this is really in response to so many people having incredible levels of stress about back to school. And that is not only our district staff, our principals, our teachers, our parents, our communities. And so the stress can be handled better when we have a plan for managing that stress. So I would like to start off with a few lines from the Serenity Prayer. And I think most of you know the Serenity Prayer. It is used in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and framed in people's offices. And really the first 4 lines sum up so much of what applies to our current situation. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think that's wisdom in itself. So if you don't know the rest of the Serenity Prayer, here is the rest of it. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make things right if I surrender to his will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and ever in the next. Amen. So there's some great lessons in that. One, that we have to live one day at a time and enjoy one moment at a time, and that there are going to be hardships on this pathway, and that we will have to trust that this is all going to be right and that we will be happy. What a great prayer. So the first tip is to acknowledge that no amount of planning is adequately going to predict or prepare us for what's coming. Obviously, we're still going to be planning, and we may have multiple plans depending on how many times the situation changes. In education, we tend to be very static because our situation has not changed. We do plans, we do 5-year strategic plans. And in the business world, depending on the situation, they have to be a lot more adaptive. They have to be quicker to change based on the environment. And that's really where we find ourselves in the education world. So know that you will plan, but those plans will change, and they will probably change again. So the second tip is to really assure your staff and parents that you are doing everything you can to be ready, and that plans will change rapidly. And they understand that. They may not be happy with the changes, but telling people that you are doing everything that you can to be ready, and then doing your best to plan proactively and communicate those plans is going to build people's confidence in you. One tip that I have, which is survival tip 3, is to really focus on health and safety first, those relationships and trust second, and then learning will happen when those other 2 things are present. And that goes against our nature, because as educators, we know that learning is the real reason that we're in school. And what we sometimes have to remind ourselves is that if we are not taking care of health and safety and relationships and trust, then learning cannot happen. So if you focus on those things and then focus on learning, I think that that will help you. Survival tip number 4 is to really focus on what's most important. And that's really hard for us to do because we're creatures of habit and we do things the same way year after year. And so what this school year is going to look like is really not doing things unless they are essential and incredibly important. One of my best examples that I can share are those continuous improvement plans. We tend to write those for a year at a time, and then look back on them to see if we accomplished what we had set out to do. And I think that planning for a whole year at this point is not going to be very effective. So really identifying what are the things that we've got to do when we get kids here. How do we use our time best with them? If we have to send them home, what are the things that are going to matter the most? So keep that in mind. Survival tip number 5, get your staff to help you with these plans. Many of them have high anxiety, and the more that they help with the plans, that's going to help alleviate their anxiety. And then it's also going to help them be able to fulfill what you've planned. And I can always tell you that when people help me plan, the product is much better than if they left it to me on my own. Survival tip number 6, acknowledge anxiety and then take steps to alleviate it. And acknowledging your own anxiety, acknowledging the anxiety of your staff, your parents, and even your students, it goes a long way to helping people alleviate it. And probably one of the most important components of that is the communication piece. And you see the little girl in the picture talking through the tin can. And of course, it's tied to another tin can on the other side of the string. And so we've really got to be very conscious and intentional in how we communicate to parents and to students and to teachers, because they are looking to us to be a calming source, but then also acknowledge that anxiety is something normal to have in the midst of a global pandemic. Survival tip number 7, let teachers collaborate and innovate. I think that this is really going to be important for your planning, not only for starting school back, but for throughout the year in terms of instruction. And I think it's going to look different than what we've ever done before. So we will have more information on that in a subsequent webinar. Survival tip number 8, creating checklists and scripts is going to alleviate the information overload. And this is also going to help your teachers and office staff and even you survive in the midst of chaos sometimes, because when our brains are overloaded, they don't think very well. And so if you can go ahead and think now, create a checklist for if a child gets into a classroom, what is the teacher supposed to do if that child is displaying symptoms of the virus? What happens when the child tells the teacher, someone at my home has the virus? What happens when the teacher feels like she has symptoms? What happens when your office staff encounters people who want to come into the school and not follow procedure? Scripts are really a great talking tool for parents when teachers are having to have difficult conversations or just any conversation with them. It gives them a reference point, and they don't have to think through when their brain is already overloaded with so many other things. Survival tip number 9, conduct after-action reviews often. If you don't know what an after-action review, our military uses them in lots of ways, most notably, after troops have gone into battle, after they've been deployed, and they really use that opportunity to figure out what went well, what did not go well, what do we need to change for next time. And if you can go ahead and schedule those before school starts. And so I would definitely recommend having one of those after the first day of school, after the first week of school, 2 weeks into school, or after any other milestone that you think can help you program this in so that you don't have to think of doing it. You just know it's already on the calendar, it's been communicated to everyone, and then you can really sit down and learn from what's happened up to this point. Then survival tip number 10, building infrequent feedback from everyone. And again, this is something if you can go ahead and schedule so that you don't have to think about it. And what you're really looking for is feedback from your students, your teachers, your parents, and even the community. And this can be more targeted the more often that you do. And so if you do it after the first day of school, then it can really be targeted to the first day of school. If you do it after the first week, then it will have to be broader and include more information. So as people look back, as they go back down memory lane, what they will remember is attitude, the compassion, the care, the love that we have for our students and for our teachers. And so really let that be one of your main goals, is to express to the people that you encounter why we're here. I believe that we're servant leaders. And so in that role, my job is to take care of people. And then as we go forward, we will be able to focus more on the learning. And in fact, that's what our next webinar will be about: planning instruction for maximum effect during a pandemic. Again, thank you for joining us. This is Shelley Bell-Smith with Brightspot Ed. This webinar will be on our website, and links to it will go out on our social media. Please join us at Brightspot Ed for more information on this and other topics. Thank you so much for attending.